What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls commentary. Alright, guys, I've finally done it. Now, ever since the initial announcement that there would be a sequel to Dark Souls, and, in addition to the follow-up videos and interviews or whatnot, I've had people ask me to upload a first impressions, an opinion, or even a reaction to not only the interviews, not only the trailers or the clips, but also with the overall initial opinion to what we have been showcased with regard to Dark Souls 2. And I reserved myself. I didn't really want to say anything. I didn't want to add my opinion yet because I really wanted more information before I can actually get a good sound opinion going. So after having played the beta and experienced the game myself hands-on, I figured this is like the perfect opportunity for me to go ahead and give my initial impressions, opinions, and anything else I can ramble on, right, for as long as this video will be going. So, I hope you guys bear with me. Keep in mind that all of the opinions and everything that I have to say is relative to the beta, right? So please don't leave me any comments saying, "Yo, Brigade, see, this is why we don't like you, son. Because, see, this is a beta, and you talking as if this is the final product. They still got changes, son." I don't want to hear none of that stuff. I already understand it's a beta. But see, the way I see it, whenever a company decides to release a beta, there are a lot of the basics that they have already worked on, right? Whenever they release a beta, a lot of times, however you respond, whatever your comments are, they're just looking for little small improvements, like may it be perhaps you're getting stuck in an environment, right? So they'll just move that piece of environment so that you can't get stuck anymore. Or maybe there may be some type of connection issues or something related. That's what betas are for. Betas, they're not like this thing where, they're starting from, let's just say 10%. They release a beta, and based upon the feedback, they go ahead and create the rest of the 90%. Betas do not work like that. So some of the basics, like movements, attacks, potential weapons, a lot of those things are what you're actually going to see in the final product. Now, like I said before, there will be room for improvement based upon the responses to the beta, perhaps any opinions or any feedback that they are willing to consider in response to the beta. But a lot of the basics are some of the same things that we're going to notice at the final result, well, actually at the final product. All right, so keep all that in mind, that all of my opinions so far are based upon the beta. Now, why is this important? There's a lot of well-respected guys out there, namely Epic, good old Vatty, the lore guy. Excuse me, I got a cold over here. Good old Vatty, the lore guy, German Spy, and a good number of other people. I've kind of watched their videos, listened to their first impressions and their initial responses. And, the thing that really concerned me is that a lot of these well-respected larger guys are not PvP guys. They're not. So they're going to analyze, and keep in mind, this is not to say anything negative about those who involve themselves more with PvE and lore. This is not to say anything against them. What I'm saying is, since they focus more so on lore and PvE, their viewpoint, their opinions, the way they approach this thing is going to be a lot different than someone who primarily engages in PvP. Right? Because case in point, I think the lore is cool, I think the game is cool, and I'm talking about Dark Souls 1 now. But do I really care of who the firstborn son is, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, it's cool for some kind of campfire story type deal, but I could really, I couldn't care less, right? I mean, it's cool. Vaddy has awesome videos. I watch all of them, but do I really concern myself with the lore? No, I really don't. I concern myself mostly with PvP. So a lot of the opinions that I'm going to have will be with regard to PvP, but I will briefly cover my opinions of the PvE. Right, so now that I've gotten all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So with regard to PvE, I think PvE is fine. I like the changes to the environment. You know, I like the way the beta looked. I like the way the enemies functioned. You know, one thing about Dark Souls, and specifically PvE, you know, let's just say you had a hollow or some type of, you know, enemy other than a boss. In most cases, when they attack, right, whatever direction they were facing when they started the attack would be the same direction that they would face at the end of the attack. In most cases, right, which allowed for even the most inexperienced player to easily circle around them for the BS. It's a lot different with Dark Souls 2, specifically with the PvE. One thing that I've noticed with PvE is that, you know, they're not going to just stay in one place, you know, and face the same direction at the end of their attack as they did when they initiated it. What I have found is in a lot of these examples, they will follow you. Like, so in other words, if you see them starting to initiate an attack, and let's just say you attempt to circle them clockwise, well, they will circle you in the same direction. So if you think you're just going to easily get in there and, you know, BS them, you're gonna get met with a big surprise, because it's not going to happen that way. It's not going to be that easy. Now, that being said, I didn't really think this game was, now, like I said before, keep in mind, I'm only talking about the beta, and I do understand that maybe they may have made the beta a little easier, right, so it wouldn't be as difficult for most people, you know, during their initial experience. I am taking that into consideration, but I don't really think it was all that difficult. Now, perhaps I'm biased. You know, maybe you can say, well, Brigade, you're biased because you played both previous Souls games. Well, that is true. But, I mean, at the same time, even though I had a lot of experience with Demon Souls, I still had a hard time with Dark Souls, right? And I think most of the challenges that I faced in the PvE during the beta was not necessarily because I didn't understand, you know, that you should be a little more patient, perhaps use your shield more a little bit. But I think most of the problems that I had was, I mean, just kind of getting used to the movements, getting used to the new swing speeds, to the new weapon swinging animations, right? And that's pretty much it. Getting used to the fact that you can't, you know, easily roll BS or BS or just a standard BS, like I said, or can't even do a standard BS to the same degree that you could during the first Dark Souls. So initially it was a challenge because I'm basically just getting used to a new game, new engine and all of that. But once I got through to the basics, it wasn't really all that difficult, right? All you basically had to do was to be a little patient, take your time, make sure you're not trying to go in like, I mean, Rambo, and engage when you see an opening. So, you know, my initial reaction, the PvE was cool. I liked the environments and everything, but it wasn't necessarily all that difficult, right? But aside from the environment, aside from, you know, now we have grass that blows in the wind, as you guys can see. Now your clothing also blows in the wind, and it kind of moves along with you as you're moving. All of those things are cool. All of those things are wonderful. So with regard to PvE, the game's good. Now, I mean, in some parts is a little more darker than others, right? And that kind of posed somewhat of a challenge, but all I did was go into the options menu and brighten the game settings. So that kind of worked that itself out. So I wouldn't really consider that as a PvE problem, because that's kind of something you can manipulate on your own. So with regard to that, PvE is cool. Now, that being said, let's start talking about the PvP. And it's kind of funny because my opinion about PvE is so brief because I really didn't find that much to talk about with regard to PvE. Now granted, I do involve myself more so in PvP, but it still doesn't negate the fact that the PvE, at least in the beta, seems to be good. Especially if you're new to the Souls series, I can imagine that you will definitely be challenged. Now, if you have a little, I'll just say moderate experience in Dark Souls, and maybe even with both Souls games, I don't really think it'll be that much of a challenge to you, because outside of getting used to the new engine and the new weapons and learning how they work, it won't really be all that difficult. Now, one thing with regard to PvP, so now we can start going into it. There's a difference between both games as far as attributes. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. Now, keep in mind, I do not go by cue cards. I do not go by any of that crap. So if my dialogue is just going in all kind of directions, just kind of bear with me. I'll try to swing it back and bring it back home whenever I feel myself just kind of ranting. Now, the original Dark Souls had a total of 8 attributes, 7 functional attributes. Now, why am I making a distinction between absolute attributes and functional attributes? The reason why I say that is because, at least in Dark Souls, not really, I would even say probably nobody invested soul levels into resistance, right? It was just kind of one of those things that existed, but existed really to not exist, because who even invested points in resistance? So although you had 8 total attributes, you had 7 functional ones, right? So in other words, if you were a pure melee, more than likely you invested in vitality, endurance, strength, and dexterity. If you're a mage, obviously intelligence, vitality, endurance, and maybe the minimum requirements for whatever weapons you want to be able to use in both strength and dexterity. The same could be said for faith. But see, with basically only having 7 attributes, it was easy to create a build at, as low as, let's just say as low as 50. That could be good. And as high as 125. That was one of the main reasons why we had that meta at somewhere between 120 and 130. Because you can basically create the perfect build, all considering diminished returns. There was no problem with creating the perfect build at 125. So for a lot of you guys that are kind of new and you're kind of like, why should we limit ourselves? It's not that we were suggesting that you should limit yourself. We were just basically saying, you can put a complete build together. At minimum, I'll just say 100, but at most 125, and absolutely no further than 130, right? Because I even have, as a matter of fact, I think I have a build that's 130. It's like a 2840 Dark Moon Blade build, and I can carry whatever weapons I want. I get the quality benefit. In addition to that, I have 30 in faith, and that's a soul level 130, right? That's kind of like a 5 soul level increase extreme. But seeing that we now have 10 attributes, what will the new PvP soul level meta be? Right? Because you have Vigor that regulates health points. You have Endurance that only regulates stamina. Vitality deals with your equipment load, and assuming that that will function the same way as the original Dark Souls, it will also regulate how fast you are able to move, right? So whether you roll at the speed that you see here, or if they have an option for you to roll even faster. right? That's what your vitality will regulate. Then you have attunement, which basically, the more you increase your points into attunement, that'll give you more slots for casting and a faster swings casting speed. Obviously you have strength and dexterity. Then you have resistance. Whereas in the original Dark Souls, it didn't really do anything. Resistance now helps to boost your overall defense. So it's not just simply going up in soul levels. It's going to, also contribute to increasing your defense. Now you need to invest some points, or at least consider investing some points into resistance. Then you have agility, intelligence, and faith. So you have a total of 10 attributes. So let's just think about what will the new soul level meta be for PvP now that we have 10 attributes. And after you read all the description, you have to consider all of them. And as a matter of fact, if you want to be a pure melee build, you have to at least consider 8 of them out of the 10. Right? And if you want to be a mage or maybe even a cleric, you'll have to consider 9 of them. So I think that's kind of interesting, saying that we have a difference in the total number of attributes. That's really going to be really pretty interesting for me to see what the new meta will be and see how builds will be able to be created now that we have more attributes, and seeing that the attributes that once functioned one way in the original Dark Souls will now function a different way in the sequel. Right? So, in addition to that, one of the biggest problems that I have with the beta and in a lot of the videos that I saw, I just simply do not like these animations. I do not like the animations. Specifically, the running, the walking, how the character makes, how the character feels, the movement, the control. I absolutely do not like it. Now, granted, this is my opinion, but I don't. The feel of the character, when I'm running, when I'm moving around, when I'm sprinting, I feel like I'm riding a bull. There was a lot of times whenever I had to run, do unlock play, do pivots, do quick turns, 90-degree angles, I felt like I was not in control of the character. It was just too clumsy feeling, too heavy, too loose. I hated the controls. And there's so many implications for these loose feeling controls for PvP that I don't even think I can make a video long enough to talk about that. Because one thing that made Dark Souls so good, specifically the PvP, is that the controls were tightly calibrated. So in other words, you could go from locked to unlocked. You could sprint, you can quickly turn around, you can quickly, because I know a lot of times you guys have seen in these videos, certain techniques that, and they're not even quote unquote advanced. We're not even talking about any of these advanced techniques. We're talking about basic techniques. I know you guys have seen plenty of times before when someone might do the, let's just say you do the Wrath of the Gods into backstab. The reason why that is possible, because the movement of the character is so tightly calibrated that you can instantly turn around, you can instantly, do quick pivots without the character feeling so heavy and so loose that, you're kind of like not even in control. When I played this game, I felt like, whenever I had to sprint, specifically in my PvP matches, there were some times where, let's just say someone was, as a matter of fact, let's just run through a real quick example. Alright, so let's take this invasion. Now, during the time that this invasion is being shown, I want you guys to pay close attention to a few things. Number one, I want you guys to pay attention to the stun lock animation, because we're still talking about animations. And I want you to pay attention to, and actually we'll see. Now check this out. Okay, so this guy's got his shield up. No problem. Now that's the stun lock. If you notice that, that stun lock is so... I think they should have done more work with the animations to that stun lock. Because at least in Dark... Now, check it out. Now, those animations are so basic, you know, because at least in Dark Souls, when you got hit, when you got stun locked, you felt it. The character looked like he suffered. The character looked like he was in pain. Now, notice this pivot. Here's why I missed. You notice I'm right here in position, but guess what? I missed. Now, keep in mind, if this were Dark Souls, I would have been in perfect position to engage, right? But that pivot, specifically with Dark Souls 2, the character was so heavy feeling that at the time that I attacked was after I had already passed the character. So in other words, the feel of the game, the character was moving so fast that I felt like I didn't really have control whenever I had to do a quick movement. Another thing that I really do not like is the targeting. It is so slow. It is not that, once again, if you guys notice, I was right behind them. And at the time that I was right behind them, I initiated the attack. But because the feeling is as though the character is in more control than you are of the character. So in that particular instance, I was punished for it. Let's go into yet another invasion to kind of demonstrate my point a little further with regard to animations. The animations, because see, the thing is, with all the improvements that they made on the characters, the environment, and everything else, you would think they would have also improved on the animations. Case in point, now I'm going to sneak up on this guy. Now I have a Zweihander, right? And let's see. So what's coming up real soon? I want you guys to pay close attention. I catch it. I'm going to get him by surprise. Check it. Look how flat he looks. You guys see that? And then he lands on his feet. That animation needs a lot of work. That's not even an improvement from the original Dark Souls. And as a matter of fact, if you guys didn't catch that, go ahead, rewind it, and run that back. Because right after this, we're going to see a few examples of, you know, all the detail and work they put into the animations into the original Dark Souls. Not only with stun lock, but also animations where you get flipped into the air. Right? So essentially, we went from a lot of attention to detail to almost next to nothing. Now notice this. Look at the animation in slow motion. Body flown up into the air. Arms and legs dangling. Dumped on his head, turned around. Arms, legs, everything. That's suffering. You guys notice all that attention to detail? We went from doing all that to basically nothing. A thrown up in the air animation that basically just looks like a straw man for the most part. Check it out. Look at this animation. What is that? In other words, you invested all this time to make the grass flow and to make a cape or your clothes blow in the wind, but you can't put more attention to detail into these animations. Once again, let's look at the stun locks. See, that's suffering. Look at that. That is suffering. And not only can you see and feel the pain and suffering into your character when they're getting stun locked, but there's no mistaking. Right? There's no mistaking to that. Once again, let's check out this stun lock. Doing. Check it out. You guys see all that attention to detail? It's not just one of these things where you just feel like your character is just floating backwards as they're being stun locked. We went from all of this. Notice that last hit. Doing. See, you feel the pain in the original Dark Souls. Because those animations make it feel more lifelike almost. So that's one of the, that's yet another thing that I hate about the animations, at least in the beta. Now check this out. This is a stun lock. Look at this. Like, seriously, what is that? He's just floating backwards. Now, if you say, well, come on, Brigade, that's not even a real stun lock. Okay, well, I'm going to show you another example. Now, check this out. He's getting ready to stun lock me again. Here we go. Now, check it out. Like, what is that? That looks nothing more than an aggressive shove on the back. Now, keep in mind, for all you guys that like stun locking so much, you guys are going to be pros in the next Dark Souls game. Because stun locking is back, and you cannot escape from it. So for all of you guys, because think about it, not too long ago, I did a 2-part video series. I did one in defense of toggle escaping. And my argument was basically, I'm fine with the fact that they removed toggle escaping, but they should include some type of mechanic to prevent from being stun locked for 5 or 6 hits. Because if you maintain stun lock and you do not put in some type of mechanic to prevent from continuously being stun locked, the only thing that this franchise is going to turn into is, a competition as to who can hit who first. And basically, whoever hits who first, you basically won. Not because you outplayed someone, not because you so-called outskilled someone, but only because you were the first one to beat them to the stun lock. That's it. See, at least in Dark Souls, they have mechanics out there that would prevent you from being stun locked 5 or 6 hits. It's not like that in Dark Souls 2, at least in the beta. Now, between now and then, they might come up with something. But the way they have the game now, the whole time I was in the beta, it was basically whoever can hit whoever can land the first hit, you basically won. Because as long as you do not run out of stamina, you can get like 5 or 6 hits in. And that's ridiculous. Spammers should not be rewarded. And I know a lot of you people whose primary means of engagement is to spam. Your argument will be, well, just don't get hit. If you're good, you won't get hit. That's not even realistic. There's lag there. There's all type of things. There's latency there. There's all type of things that, despite your own efforts, despite your own attention to detail, you just might get hit. And, in the event that you are hit, you shouldn't have to suffer for 5 or 6 consecutive hits, or even death, only because there's nothing in place to prevent you from being stun locked into infinity. And like I said before, it was quite funny when I put that video out, because one thing that I mentioned in part 2 of that video, I said if they do not include some type of mechanic to prevent from being infinitely stun locked, PvP will turn extremely sloppy. I will continue to say that now that I've gotten my paws on this game and I see how loose the controls are. I see how heavy and weighty and clunky the character feels, especially when you're running, playing unlocked, and doing these quick pivots and quick turns. If they do not calibrate this game a little more tightly, a little more tighter between now and then, all that skill stuff, all those things you guys took for granted, all that, MLG pro tactics, you can throw all that stuff out the window. Right? And like I said before, if you guys don't want to believe me, listen to some of the opinions of some of these other PvPers who played the game. I'm not talking about these PvE lovers. I'm not hating on you PvE lovers, but I'm talking specifically to the people who like PvP. You don't believe me? You ask some of those guys, how did the character feel? What did it feel like in a PvP match? They'll tell you. Basically, whoever hit who first almost determined the victory. Because granted, you can kind of do something to turn the game around, but that's only after you've been stun locked after 4 or 5 hits. And that's what it's going to turn into, because we have poise, and at least up to this point, there's nothing to prevent stun lock. So people are going to stack poise, and they're just going to sit back, be defensive, and whoever is the first one to get hit, you're screwed for the most part. right? So stun locking has returned. So for all you R1 spammers, you guys are going to be the new pros. You know, being able to defend against that, being able to stop that and counter it, you guys can kiss all that stuff goodbye. Now, while we're on the subject of poise, one thing I might want to remind you guys in the event that, well, actually, maybe not even remind you, maybe I should just advise you in the event that you didn't know already. You're going to have two extremes. People are going to, when they first get the game and start involving themselves in PvP, they're going to start to get tired of being stun locked. If the developers decide to not put something together to prevent from being stun locked, if they keep the beta if they keep the game the way it was presented to us in the beta, specifically with regard to stun locking, people are going to get tired of that. And they're going to go over to the other extreme, which means they're going to stack a lot of poise. Now, what will that mean? The way I see it, is going to cause for a whole bunch of guys to use the same type of builds. Why do I say that? Because in an effort to try to dissuade you from stacking poise, they have added requirements to certain armors that will award you poise. So in other words, in an effort to kind of prevent people from doing it, they said, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll just add a few minimum requirements to those type of armors. Well, guess what? Like I said before, some people will be able to, some people will be willing to make that sacrifice because they're tired of getting hit for 5 or 6 consecutive times without being able to do something about it. Now, also on the subject of being stun locked, it appears as though, now granted, I wasn't able to play for 3 hours. I worked a 16-hour day and I came home and I played for probably like an hour because I was very tired and I had to get right back up to go back to work. But from the experiences that I had, it appears as though, even though you will get stun locked, hits appear to inflict less damage with each hit. So in other words, let's just say, for example, let's just say you have 2,000 HP. Right, and let's just say the starting hit will inflict 500 damage. An example of what I'm talking about, it would kind of be like the first hit will hit for 500, second hit for 400, third hit for 300, and fourth hit for 200. Now that's not the actual, calculation. I'm just saying hypothetically, that's what it would do. But at the end of the day, you're still getting chained for the most part, right? You're still being stun locked into a series of damage-taking hits that you could avoid. But hey, that's back. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of things that will not return. Ghost striking, the little ghost strikes, that crap is gone. Now I'm kind of good with that one, right? Because, there was really no need for that. In other words, somebody may argue, well, we use ghost strikes for people who turtle. Well, you have a show tail. Right? So you do have an alternative, actually. So there is a counter to people who attempt to turtle. So the ghost strikes, whatever. The reverse rolls, based upon my experience, you can't cut it. Like I said before, the locking, the target locking on and off is extremely slow. Extremely slow. For a lot of you guys that are familiar with Dark Souls PvP, specifically the ones that like to target on and off, you will know that once you click that lock and unlock, it is very quick and it allows you to be very technical and engaging. You get to keep up a nice good pace, right, without anything being interrupted because, like I said before, your player just feels like a bulldozer just running around the screen. No, because of the calibrated character controls in Dark Souls, you're able to switch on lock and on and off lock. You can sprint, you can do it. As a matter of fact, let me just go ahead and demonstrate you guys yet another example. Now, in this particular match, I want you to pay attention to, and actually, shout out to Skitless. I want you guys to pay attention to, and I'm actually doing this on purpose, right? I'm playing unlocked on purpose, and I'm switching back and forth between lock and unlock. Notice I'm also sprinting at several intervals, right? When I'm sprinting, I'm not off balance, I'm not off track. I feel in control. Everything is all good. On the other hand, I'm fine with the way they have the targeting. But when you switch on and off targeting, it should be a lot faster than what it is right now. Another thing, I cannot stress this. As a matter of fact, if I were to give a suggestion for anyone to somewhat prepare for Dark Souls 2, I would suggest for all of you guys to start trying to manually aim a lot more. Because I'm telling you, if they do not do anything about that lock on and lock off system, you guys are going to be missing a lot of hits. Because the thing is, even though you may be targeted, if you're not manually aiming with the thumbstick, you're still going to miss. So although you're targeting, in Dark Souls, the way the targeting works, you move around the target, right? So you're always facing them no matter what you're doing as long as the lock on is engaged. It's not like that with Dark Souls 2. Now, it may visually orient you, but that's not necessarily where your weapon is going to go, right? So you guys need to keep that in mind. If you guys want to, do whatever you can, if I had to give you a suggestion on how to prepare, I would suggest for you to practice locking on and off, and when you are when you do not have lock on engaged, to go ahead and practice manually aiming, because you guys are going to run into that problem should they keep the target on and off system the way that it currently exists in Dark Souls. Well, in other words, the way it currently exists in the beta. Alright, so another thing that I wanted to cover. For a lot of those turtles, a lot of you guys are like just, you just shield up and back up, do nothing but just shield up as a strategy. Dark Souls 2 has something for you. And they have this, I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I just tried to do an unlock quick pivot and I wasn't able to do it. And I was kind of practicing that a little bit right here with this enemy to try to get a feel for the pivoting. And like I said before, it is so loose and so sloppy and so not calibrated that I kept missing over and over again. And that's kind of like what I was doing with the fat guy, so that's why I'm kind of circling and doing whatever. But anyway, back to the point. For a lot of you guys like to go ahead and shield up. You guys are going to have a surprise if you try that shield up crap for Dark Souls 2. And the reason why I say that is because they have a guard break, which is formerly the kick animation in the original Dark Souls. It will break your guard. And guess what? Once your guard is broken, you can get the riposte action done to you. So you can be punished for turtling too hard. Now keep in mind, the person who's going to go ahead and do the guard break, you basically have to be, giving them a tongue kiss, French kiss, depending upon where you're from. You're going to have to basically be in their face, chest to chest, to be able to do it, because if you're too far, you won't be able to do it. So just go ahead and keep that in mind for all you turtlers out there. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, I really wish the original director did not take that, let's just say, reassignment. I think his name is Miyazaki. I really don't want to mispronounce his name, so I'll just, in the event that I said it wrong, I'll just say the original director. I really wish he would have stayed on this project. I really hate. And you know what? For a lot of you lore guys that me listening, I'm not just saying this only for PvP. Because this new guy may even bring some changes to the lore that you guys may not necessarily be expecting. Because I know a lot of you guys are up to date on the Demon Souls lore, the Dark Souls lore, and just to continue with one aspect of the game that you guys enjoy. I know you guys will hate it for you to get deeper and deeper into the story, and you're like, hold on, man, 2 and 2 is not adding up. Right, so it's just really unfortunate. I had a lot of concerns once I found out that they would have a different director, and the one from Demon Souls will be taking the back seat for a what they call a quote unquote reassignment. I really hate it, but I mean, we can't do anything about it. We have like 5 months until the project will be complete and released, so I hope you guys. It is what it is. Like I said before, this is just my first impression, so I'm just doing a lot of rambling right now. But let me just move on to the next subject. Next thing I want to talk about. Now let's talk invasions. Now, whoever this new guy is, and I'm not saying that in any way to imply disrespect. I'm just talking. Whoever this new guy is, to the extent that he actually played the original Dark Souls, that guy must have a vendetta against Dark Wraiths. Now keep in mind, they're not going to be called Dark Wraiths in the sequel. But, I mean, that's what I'm going to call them. I mean, there have always been Dark Wraiths, so that's what I'm going to call them. That guy must definitely have a vendetta against Dark Wraiths. Because Dark Wraiths have so much against them that is going to be crazy. 2v1s, I mean, GG, everybody out there. GG, flat out. Because you can be intentionally ganked, and you can be unintentionally ganked. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? You can be intentionally ganked by a host and up to 2 whites. Okay, so that's intentional. You're purposely summoning 2 people, and those people are purposely sitting there with you and ganking. Okay, no problem with that because, we're kind of used to that from the original Dark Souls, and we're used to that from Demon Souls. But another thing is, you can be unintentionally ganked in the sense that you can have a white who's just in his own world, minding his own business. But these blues with the Covenant ring could come out of nowhere. So the host could, let's just say he wanted to brave it out on his own. He can unintentionally, and, not even with the conscious intent to gank. He can basically just have a blue arrive in his world. So as a red, you're screwed for the most part. You're pretty much screwed. You're going to have guys purposely ganking you and unintentionally ganking you. And not even that, you guys are only going to get like 75% of your vigor. So that's another thing. And on top of that, everyone can flask. Now, some people are cheering the hoorahs and all that about that. But if you fight gankers, that's going to be a problem. And let me tell you why. Depending upon how many Estus flasks these guys are allowed to have. Number 1, I think is agility. That agility stat will boost how fast you can drink Estus. So granted, in the beta, if you weren't able to drink fast, just go ahead and boost up that agility and you'll be drinking, like taking down a shot from a shot glass. I swear that's pretty much how fast it is, because I saw a guy drink Estus. It was like instant HP revitalization. So, you're going to have 75% HP, ganked intentionally and unintentionally. And everyone can foul, and everyone can flask. Not even that, the fact that they have a slower targeting system, slower animations, this new lock-on, lock-off system, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to, let's just say, I have several Forest videos. And in some of those videos, is a situation where I BS somebody, and you know what gankers do. They kind of stand right behind you for the BS. Well, in Dark Souls, like I said before, the calibration is so quick and so tight that you can unlock, instantly turn around, and before they really have time to hit you with their weapon, if you time it correctly, you can parry them. Well, guess what? The lock-on, the lock-off system, in addition to the character movements, are not that fast. It is not that calibrated. It is not that quick. You're going to get hit. I'm telling you, I've tried it several times. And if they, if one is facing you and one is in the back and you try to do some kind of fancy dancy, target, unlock, turn around real quick, it is super slow. So for all you Dark Wraiths out there, GG fellas, because whoever this new director is, that guy must hate us. Flat out. He must have a thing, he must have a vendetta against Dark Wraiths, because we have so many negatives in our favor. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying that there will be no success. I'm saying given that you will be invading with 75% health, everyone can flask, and keep in mind, we don't know what's the maximum amount of flasks everyone can have. Because think about it, at least in Dark Souls 1, there's a little pressure. I'm pretty sure if you guys are used to invading in the forest, you guys can attest to the fact that in a lot of cases, when you are placing a lot of stress on that host, a lot of times he don't have time to sit there and flask and heal his summons. So at least, although you're fighting two people, it's a little easier on the invader in the sense that, even if they do heal, they have to run off into the distance and pop a humanity. Well, guess what? If you have a host and two whites with high agility, you're pretty much screwed. They have full health, and actually, let me take that back. I'm not really sure if the blues or if the whites have full health, but I do know that the Dark Wraiths come in at somewhere around 75% health. But to the extent that they do come in at full health, you're going to be screwed. There's going to be 3 people, full health, and, all that quick mobility and everything that we experience in Dark Souls 1 is non-existent. So GG, once again. Another thing, blues can also team up with a host that already has a white there. Right? So everyone's against Dark Wraiths. Hosts, whites and blues. Man, it's going to be a hard life for the Dark Wraiths. Like, seriously, no joke. And that was that ugly stun lock animation for which I got hit like 4 or 5 times. So I'm not talking about that final blow, but before that. So, I think I should probably wrap this up. And if I kind of think up anything else to talk about, I'll do it in another video, because this is probably the longest video I've ever created. To wrap this thing up, all I'll say is this. If I had to make any suggestions, those suggestions would be: tighten up the calibration of the character moves. Please tighten that up. We need more technical, and a little more tightly calibrated movements so that we can do a lot of good things in Dark Souls 2, specifically with regard to PvP. Number 2, if you do not bring back toggle escape, which I'm fine with, just create some type of mechanic that would prevent us from being infinitely stun locked. Or even stun lock, period. Because in other words, there should be something to prevent it. Now, just like Dark Souls 1, there was something to prevent it. Now, if you weren't able to do it, that's another thing. But at least there was a way to counter people who would try to stun lock you into infinity. There's no counter to it, at least that has been found or discovered up to this point in the beta. So that's about it. That's my review of the beta. Those are my opinions and my first impression. Once again, those are opinions, right? So for a lot of you guys that, you say that I talk as if my opinion is gospel. No, I don't. But these are my opinions based upon everything that I know up to this point and my hands-on experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, specifically the commentary. Right, because I wasn't really doing anything in particular in the game itself. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And hey, until next time, Martyrs Brigade.